you'll find a lot of information for the local competition. So you'll go to kthomelessalliance.org, and the COC competition is under what's called the Pool for Homeless Initiatives Locally, or the PHIL NOFA. So you can find that as one of our projects, or you can go to the COC program tab. Both of them will direct you to the local resources. And those would be the local NOFA process, the supplemental application, and then the partner agreement. That's going to be similar to the MOU that we've used in past years. And then we'll be providing this webinar recording and PowerPoint for those who need to join later or want to just hear this boring presentation again. And then the KTHA listserv, make sure that you are signed up for that. You can join on the homepage of our website. That's really where we disseminate information on the competition and many other things that have to do with the COC. So if you want to stay apprised of funding opportunities, so on and so forth, sign up for that. So the competition overview, we have about $2.6 million available. The application is due on September 30th. That's the collaborative application. So you all, if you're going for HUD funding, you're going to have an application due date of August 22nd. That's so that we can do the local priority list. The COC program is designed to promote a community-wide commitment to the goal of ending homelessness, to provide funding to quickly rehouse homeless individuals and youth while minimizing the trauma and dislocation caused by homelessness, to promote access to and effective utilization of mainstream programs by homeless individuals and families, and to optimize self-sufficiency among those experiencing homelessness. This webinar is intended to provide an overview of the COC requirements and this funding opportunity. Most importantly, to ensure a comprehensive understanding and compliance with all COC requirements, all applicants should read and be familiar with the 2019 COC program NOFA and the COC program interim rule. I think what's most important about that is we're just going to be touching on some of those concepts today, but it's really your responsibility to make sure that you completely understand HUD's rules and regulations, both for the NOFA, but also for operating a project. So another important thing to note is that funds through the COC program are not available for emergency shelter, homeless prevention, transitional housing, or supportive service only projects. Okay, this is really designed for housing for people experiencing homelessness. So as I mentioned earlier, there's roughly 2.6 million available, and this is how it breaks down. We have our annual renewal demand, which is all the projects that were funded last year. To keep those funded is about $2.3 million. We're eligible for 5% as bonus funding, about 114,000. Again, this year we have a DV bonus funding option, which is 224,000, and then the COC planning funds, which go to the COC to operate all of the requirements, about 68,000. That project will not be rated and ranked during the local competition. So all of these funds are going to be split up into two different tiers. So our tier 1 amount is about 2.16 million, and tier 2 will be about 238,000. So we have a few new thing about ranking this year. And what that is that tier 1 is equal to 94% of our renewal demand, which has been very similar to years past. But the most noteworthy thing is that 100% of all new projects that are renewing for the first time, those will all go into tier 1. Basically, HUD doesn't want to see projects that just got funded getting unfunded. And so they want those to be automatically renewed. So we'll have to follow suit with that this year. Our tier 2 funding is determined by the point value of each project application based on a 100-point scale. And that's at the HUD level. So regardless of where a project falls in our local ranking, HUD also scores projects. And so Those scores break down as follows. Every project, 50% of the project score in Tier 2 is based on the COC score. So all of our collaborative efforts, and then how we rank the project. So 40% of the 100 points or 40 points is how the COC ranks it. And then 10% is based on low barriers to entry for the project. There is a possibility that a project will straddle tiers. So part of it will be in Tier 1 and part will be in Tier 2. For any projects that straddle the two tiers, the Tier 1 portion will be funded in accordance with the Tier 1 process, and the Tier 2 will be funded in accordance with the Tier 2 process. So what can happen in that scenario is that just the Tier 1 portion gets funded. Now, there's also a chance that it wouldn't get funded. So for example, if you have a project, let's just pretend that's 200,000 and only 30,000 is in Tier 1, the rest of the other 170,000 is in Tier 2. If we do not get any Tier 2 projects funded and 30,000 isn't enough to operate the project, HUD will not fund it. So some highlights for the 2019 NOFA include, as I mentioned earlier, the DV bonus, bonus grant changes. So for the regular bonus, that could be a commingling of reallocation and bonus funding. We believe we're still waiting for confirmation on that. It could be used to fund an HMIS project or a coordinated entry project. Transition grants, this is something that started last year. So a project can, or an applicant can transition their project from one COC program component to another over a one-year grant cycle. So that could be, an example would be a rapid rehousing, no, I shouldn't say that. Well, I guess I could, a rapid rehousing project. So that project now wants to switch to permanent supportive housing. You could use a transition grant selection to do that, rather than unfunding a project and applying for a new one. Another option is a consolidated grant. Applicants may consolidate 2, 3, or 4 eligible renewal projects into one project during this process. And finally, expansion grants. So an applicant can apply for new funding to expand a COC-funded project. Now, last year, they let expansion also happen with non-COC program funded projects. So basically thinking it didn't have to be a new project, but that is no longer the case in 2019. A new thing in 2019 is that youth service providers are able to serve unaccompanied youth, defined as youth aged 24 or under, or families headed by youth aged 24 or under, who have an unsafe primary nighttime residence and no safe alternative to that residence. So that basically is broadening the definition of homeless for agencies that are youth serving providers. Now that definition, in accordance to HUD, is a private nonprofit organization whose primary mission is to provide services to youth aged 24 and under and families headed by youth aged 24 and under. So kind of keeping in mind, a youth service provider has to have that as their primary mission. And additionally, HUD interprets living in unsafe situations as having an unsafe primary nighttime residence and no safe alternative to that residence. So really expanding the definition of homelessness for youth. And then the documentation, if we're talking about relaxed documentation standards for youth service providers, youth aged 24 and under must not be required to provide third-party documentation that they meet the homeless definition as a condition for receiving services funded under this NOFA. Now, again, that's just for youth service providers using this expanded eligibility option. And then finally, the 2019 fair market rent amounts will apply during this NOFA. So a couple of things I'd like to highlight as far as HUD homeless policy and priorities is I'm sure you're all familiar with what they used to have as 4 priorities. We've now expanded to 6 and sort of changed it a little bit. Ending homelessness for all persons, creating a systemic response to homelessness, and strategically allocating and using resources. I won't spend time to go over those. You all can read those through the federal strategic plan to Prevent and End Homelessness, called Opening Doors. What I do want to highlight are the new policy priorities, sort of this new focus based on the change in administration. So what we're seeing now, what used to be as number 4, Housing First, is called Use an Evidence-Based Approach. And what that means is that the COC will prioritize projects that employ strong use of data and evidence, including the cost effectiveness and impact of homelessness programs on positive housing outcomes, recovery, self-sufficiency, and reducing homelessness. Another new one, increasing employment. They'd like to see projects working with local employment agencies and employers to prioritize training and employment opportunities for people experiencing homelessness. You will also see, kind of under this caveat, that for folks who can't work, they want to see that they have opportunities to volunteer. And finally, providing flexibility for Housing First with service requirements. Now, this really is the big change that we see as far as messaging through this NOFA. Really what HUD is saying through this is that projects should work with individuals and families with unconditional acceptance and without preconditions to move quickly into permanent housing. So basically, housing first. However, the new vision is that this NOFA provides communities and programs with flexibility without penalty to use service participation requirements after people have been stabilized in housing. So basically saying that there can be some service requirements once the household has been stabilized. So housing first, then laying on some service requirements. They're not mandating that. It is an option at this point. So we're going to talk about the funding options for new projects. So a new project, if you want to get into get in a new project, or you're in a brand new agency, or I shouldn't say brand new agency, but a brand new applicant to the COC program process, there are 3 ways that you could get funded. The first one is that if a renewal project is reallocated, that means that an agency has decided they do not want to renew their funding, or if the COC Rating and Ranking Committee decides not to fund a project, that's called reallocation. So there could be funding available through that, through the bonus funding, or through the domestic violence bonus funding. So new this year is that for brand new projects, HUD is allowing projects to request 1 year of funding with a longer initial grant term, not to exceed 18 months. And really, the reason for this is because HUD is finally figuring out that it takes a bit longer for a brand new grant to start up. It could be from hiring staff, finding landlords, getting environmental clearances, all of those things. So for that first year, a project can request a term of from 12 to 18 months that will account for that additional startup process and basically avoid projects returning funds to HUD because they weren't able to spend it all. So let's talk a little bit about the eligible project types under this NOFA. So we're going to go into this a little bit deeper, but it's going to be permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, joint transitional and rapid rehousing project, dedicated HMIS, and supportive service only for coordinated entry. So I'd like to talk a little bit about dedicated HMIS. That the only applicant that can pursue that project type is the lead HMIS agency for our region, which would be Kings United Way. SSO for coordinated entry, we can only submit 1 application, and we already have one through the Alliance. So just wanted to throw that out there. So with these eligible project types, the first option, option A, going with that reallocation and or bonus, you can apply for reallocated from renewal projects or bonus funding, which we believe is for a combination of reallocated funds and bonus funding. So under these 2 categories of funding, you can apply for a permanent supportive housing project. And if it's a PSH project, it has to be for chronically homeless individual, or I shouldn't say individuals, chronically homeless households or persons who meet the definition of dedicated plus. Keep in mind, though, that your folks are going to come from coordinated entry, and we will still follow the orders of priority that HUD has in place, which means we're going to prioritize chronically homeless. But the interesting thing is that HUD is not just forcing chronic homeless. They're allowing projects to expand without penalty what types of clients can be served. The other type of project is a rapid rehousing project. You could do joint transitional housing with rapid rehousing. And then, of course, we talked about HMIS or CES. Now, it's important to note if you're looking for reallocation, that possibility, just want to mention there's no guarantee that reallocated funding will be available, but it may be if one or more renewal projects decides not to apply or is not selected by the panel. The COC can only reallocate eligible renewal projects that have previously been renewed under the COC program. So again, we can't reallocate projects renewing for the first time. So the domestic violence bonus, which I would say is option B, eligible project type. So this is kind of where you want to notice that it's only rapid rehousing or joint transitional housing / rapid rehousing. Both must follow a housing first approach, but there's no PSH under this option. So DV bonus, no PSH. The interesting thing is that you can expand existing non-DV or DV projects. So if you have a project that's serving a wide variety of subpopulations, you can expand your project to focus on serving people who are fleeing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Let's see, we could also do a supportive service only project to enhance the coordinated entry functionality, to implement better policies, procedures to address the needs of those experiencing DV or related situations. So the other new thing this year is that there's no application limit. Last year, we could only submit one DV bonus project. This year, we could submit as many as we want, but there is a $25,000 minimum request. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing. And then finally, option C is expansion projects. So if you have an existing project and you want to expand it, you can do that under the DV bonus, reallocation, or the COC bonus process to expand an existing project by adding units, persons served, services provided to existing program participants, or to add additional activities for HMIS or coordinated entry projects. The catch here is that you have to submit a total of 3 applications. So the existing renewal project, a new application that's just with the expansion information, and then a third project that combines the budget and activities of the renewal project and the expansion project. The renewal and new projects will be ranked by the COC. The combined expansion project will not be ranked, and if selected for conditional award, will take the ranked position of the standalone renewal project. And the separate new project will be removed from the ranking, resulting in project applications below to slide up 1 ranked position. So I think this is really a great opportunity for our partners to consider even looking at your existing projects. If you are understaffed with case management because you're serving clients with higher barriers, this is a great way to enhance the services provided to existing program participants. So just give that some thought. So some community level changes and reminders. We're talking about earlier about HUD's new focus on promoting employment and really this whole concept of self-sufficiency. So things under promoting opportunity and economic mobility is really digging deep into the 2019 NOFA. It contains guidance on promoting prosperity and economic opportunity to the greatest extent possible by structuring programs to promote self-sufficiency and reduce dependency. This includes incorporating mechanisms such as work incentives, policies to strengthen families, and including greater participation from the private sector and faith-based organizations, all of which should work to uplift the most vulnerable to self-sufficiency, thereby alleviating the need for government assistance and reducing reliance on government interventions and resources. Additionally, there are some enhanced requirements, or maybe HUD is providing a bit more clarity that program applicants or agencies need to affirmatively further fair housing, and that there need to be economic opportunities for low and very low income persons. Really, they want to see that projects are giving people volunteer opportunities either within their organization or through partner agencies, and they're providing them opportunities to earn for earned income. And then just as in the 2018 NOFA, just reiterating meaningful participation. And what that means is that applicants must identify the steps they will take to ensure that traditionally marginalized populations, such as racial and ethnic minorities and persons with disabilities, will be able to meaningfully participate in the planning process. The applicant must identify the specific populations that it will include, identify community organizations that represent these populations, and describe how these populations will be included in the planning process. In seeking public participation, applicants and recipients must ensure that all communications are provided in a manner that is effective for persons with hearing, visual, and other communication-related disabilities, consistent with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, the Americans with Disability Act, and in addition, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So when looking at projects that are submitted through our collaborative application, so those that are selected or recommended for funding, HUD is going to look at a few things, such as eligibility for the project and project quality. So for new projects, the review process considers applicant and subrecipient eligibility and capacity, project eligibility, and project quality as a part of the threshold review. Project eligibility includes threshold requirements, passing or failing. If the standards aren't met, the project will be rejected from the competition. So applicants and subrecipients must be eligible. They must demonstrate financial and management capacity and experience to carry out the project and to administer federal funds. They must submit required certifications, propose an eligible population for the project type, show that the project is cost effective, with costs not deviating substantially from the norm in that locale for similar project activities, and agree to participate in the HMIS. The project quality threshold, HUD will review all new projects to determine if they meet the threshold requirements as specified in the NOFA. New in 2019, for new permanent housing, joint TH/rapid rehousing, and SSO coordinated entry projects, HUD has a firm requirement rather than an option that the proposed project has a specific plan to coordinate and integrate with other mainstream health, social service, and employment programs, and ensure that program participants are assisted to obtain benefits from the mainstream programs for which they may be eligible. This includes things such as Medicare, Medicaid, SSI, food stamps, local workforce, and early childhood education. For the joint TH and rapid rehousing component projects, one way to meet that threshold requirement is now changed from adhering to housing first to the following. The project has low barriers to entry and prioritizes rapid placement and stabilization in permanent housing. And then finally, renewal projects. HUD is going to assume that renewal projects meet eligibility and quality thresholds because of the previously approved application, unless information to the contrary is received. Some of that could be monitoring findings, that the recipient doesn't routinely draw down funds at least once per quarter, consistently late APRs, so on and so forth. If that happens, the project will be rejected from the competition. So as we talked it a little bit earlier, renewal grant options again are transition, consolidation, or expansion. So I just want to talk a little bit about transitioning. What that can be is that a project, as I mentioned earlier, can transition from one program component to another. So it could be transitional housing to rapid rehousing. Now, in our community, we don't have any HUD transitional housing projects, so that wouldn't apply, but it could be rapid rehousing to permanent supportive housing. Uh, by the end of the 2019 operating year, the transition grant must be operating under the new component and will be eligible to apply for renewal in the next COC program competition under the component to which it transitioned. To create a transition grant, the COC must wholly eliminate one or more projects and use those funds to create the single new transitional grant. For a new project to be considered a transition grant, the applicant for the new project must be the same recipient must be the same recipient for the renewal, for the eligible renewal grant being eliminated. No more than 50% of each transition grant may be used for costs of eligible activities of the program component originally funded. The project's operating start date will be the day after the end of the previous grant term for the expiring component. If HUD determines that a new project that applied to be a transition grant does not qualify but meets all other new project requirements, then HUD may award the project as a new project that is not a transition grant. So if you're interested in this option, be sure to read the NOFA very carefully and read the instructions on the transition grants. For consolidated grants, applicants must submit separate renewal applications for each of the grants that are proposed to be consolidated and an application for the new consolidated grant with the combined budget and information of all grants proposed in the consolidation. HUD will not permit a transitional housing and a rapid rehousing to consolidate to form a joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing component, and will not permit a transition grant to be consolidated with any other project. If an agency does decide to apply for consolidation, they must ensure consolidating projects are the same component. So you can't do transitional and consolidation. Budgets for the consolidated project application submitted exactly match the sum of the budgets for each of the individual projects as they appear in the GIW. Expiring grant numbers, operating start and end dates are provided. That operating end dates end in calendar year 2019, and that the projects are in good standing with HUD. Expansion projects. A renewal project applicant may submit a new project application to expand its current operations, as we mentioned earlier, by adding units, beds, persons served, or services provided. Additionally, an HMIS project can apply and increase the current HMIS grant activities. All renewals are eligible to apply for 1 year of funding through the renewal criteria. And then similar to prior years and in accordance with the COC program interim rule, there are match requirements, and that is a 25% cash or in-kind match required. You have to make sure that your match is used for activities that are eligible under the interim rule for the project. So not just anything in the interim rule, but for the project that you're doing. An example would be you couldn't use operation costs for projects as match in a rental assistance project because operation costs are not allowed in a rental assistance project. So cash match can be program income. It can also be funds from any source, including any federal source, excluding COC program funds, as well as state, local, and private sources, provided that funds from the source are not statutorily prohibited to be used as match. The recipient must ensure that the rules governing match funds allows them to be matched for the COC program. Additionally, you could use in-kind match. It's important to note that if you do use in-kind match, you must have an MOU between the recipient or subrecipient and the third party that will provide the services. Now that MOU is required to be executed before grant execution. The MOU must establish the unconditional commitment, except for selection to receive the grant, by the third party to provide services, the specific service to be provided, the profession of the persons providing the service, and the hourly cost of the service to be provided. In the project application through the HUD process, projects must list the type of source and the value of each match commitment, but will not be required to attach the match letter. The match information entered into eSNAPs should be based on the current commitments at the time of the project application, covering the requested grant operating period, and not based on projections. The application should be accurate with commitment letters in place that include the amount listed. Contract responsibilities. If your application is conditionally awarded, you will have a number of responsibilities. Please be sure that you are capable of carrying all of them out before submitting your application. Some of those requirements include annual audits. If you are expending $750,000 or more in federal funds, you must conduct a single or program-specific audit for that year in accordance with the provisions of OMB Circular number A-133. You will have a variety of reporting requirements, such as annual performance reports, record-keeping reports, Transparency Act, impact success indicators, etc. You will need to follow a housing first approach. You must maintain match documentation in your financial reports on a grant-specific basis. You'll be required to participate in HMIS. And as far as performance goes, your agency must perform the tasks outlined in your application and grant agreement, including complying with all the language in the applicant certifications and following all HUD statutes and regulations applicable to the grant. You must follow documentation requirements, which are outlined in the Alliance's Coordinated Entry written standards. You must follow service-related requirements, fair housing, calculation of client rent. Program fees are not allowed. Additionally, it's important to note that all COC recipients are required to institute certain policies, including participant participation, grievance procedures, due process for participant termination, staff rules, emergency safety and evacuation procedures, confidentiality restrictions, non-discrimination, free from religious influences, conflict of interest, anti-lobbying, drug-free workplace, etc. All of that to say there is a lot of standards and requirements when choosing to participate in HUD grant process, so be sure you're familiar with those and that your agency has the capacity to follow that. So let's talk a little bit about the application portal that HUD has. It's called eSNAPs. For those of you who are applying for the first time, you'll want to make sure that you go into eSNAPs. You can go into the HUD Exchange website, and then there's a link for eSNAPs, or you can go to www.hud.gov/eSNAPs. Please review all of the HUD training modules before accessing eSNAPs or attempting to enter data. They may save you time since they offer very detailed instructions and very useful tips. How-to technical guides include understanding eSNAPs features and functions, adding and deleting registrants in eSNAPs, navigating the left bar menu, creating a zip file, and capturing a screenshot. So I think all of this is to say that eSNAPs is a beast in and of itself, and so be sure that you're printing out the guides you're needing and following along. Again, if you're a new agency to HUD, you want to make sure you get in and get that established immediately. So everyone is going to need to update their project applicant information. So that includes new agencies, new applicants, and renewals. So in order to, before you can even access an application in eSnaps, you have to update your applicant profile. Project applicants must complete the profile before moving forward in the registration process. For the applicant profile to be complete, the project applicant needs to ensure the data entered in the applicant profile is accurate and select the Complete button on the submission summary screen of the applicant profile. Only after doing so will a project applicant be able to advance successfully in eSnaps to the project application. So here's a hint. Probably not a good idea to email HUD or myself saying you can't get into your project. It's going to mean you haven't done your project applicant information. So start there. Once you do get into the project application, you can see some other guides which include, in order to follow the applicant process, there are a few guidebooks. So those are the project applicant information and navigational guide, putting the project application in edit mode, how to complete the 2880 in eSnaps, the DUNS number, and SAM resource. Additionally, there are guidebooks once you get to the project funding level of how to submit a project application. So there's 4 or 5 navigation guides for that. It's important to note that you may need every single one of those guidebooks. So that could just show you the sheer complexity of actually submitting an application. But HUD has done a really good job with every one of these guidebooks to tell you exactly what you need to do. So what I do, because I have 3 applications to submit during this process, I print out both the detailed instructions and the navigational guide, and I have them side by side as I'm entering data for the competition. I've done this for many years and I still print them out every time. So if you were to call me and ask how to do something, I'm going to refer you right back to the detailed guide and navigation instructions because that is where all of those answers are for the eSnaps process. So here's a screenshot of what it looks like for just the eSnaps homepage, if you will. So what you're going to see here is there's a 2019 funding availability page. So this is what we talked about earlier. It's the, all the competition information. And there's the link to that right, to those pieces. Whoops. And then there are also a variety of other things that you can link to once you get your project funded. So what's important to note is once you finish updating the applicant profile, this is a screenshot of how to submit applications for project funding. So it shows you how to access the project application, if you're going to transfer a project, how to update the required disclosures, how to complete it in eSnaps. And believe me, there's a guidebook on everything with HUD, and you probably will need them. Make sure that you refer to the detailed instructions and the process for completing the application screens. It does seem like duplicate effort, but there's the detailed instructions and navigational guide. The detailed instructions tell you all the hints and what they're looking for. The navigational guide tells you how to navigate all of the screens and what you need to do to move through eSnaps. Keep in mind that there are renewal detailed instructions and new project detailed instructions. So make sure that you're looking at the appropriate category when you're going through eSnaps. Okay. So just to reiterate, if you are new to the competition, you'll want to establish a new eSnaps account if you haven't used eSnaps before. Again, follow the guidebooks closely. And I believe that the renewal projects that have renewed at least once may submit with no changes on select screens. So again, HUD's trying to streamline that process. The eSnap system is not always user-friendly or glitch-free. it is likely that you will encounter some problems along the way. Many problems can be avoided by following the instructions closely and relying upon the training modules. And the other hint is using the correct browser. So what I have found in my experience is that in the HUD world, Google Chrome doesn't typically work and Firefox doesn't work that well. They typically work well with like Microsoft Edge is a really good browser to use when you're doing HUD work. So eSNAP's attachments. So you have to complete the applicant profile, which we've talked about, and a project application for each project. So only one applicant profile for your agency, and then a project application for each project. Each applicant completes, so another thing to note in the applicant profile is that you need to have a code of conduct, nonprofit documentation, a survey on equal employment opportunity, and an approved indirect cost rate if you're using one. Attached to the project application would be your 501c3 letter to show that you're eligible, and then any other required attachments that HUD may require for your project type. So let's dig deeper a little bit into the applicant profile. So as I mentioned before, you're going to want to make sure that you're reviewing the guides. But one thing that you need to know is that if you are an existing applicant, it's going to show on your applicant profile that it's already been completed, that it's going to be grayed out and it won't let you click. So what you need to do is you have to put the profile back into edit mode, make at least one change, and select complete again. All required attachments must be uploaded before the project applicant will be able to access the application. So a little helpful hint here is that I re-upload all of my documentation so that it shows a new date, and I know that they all match within the competition time frame. So here's what it looks like, and what I was mentioning is that if you get into your applicant profile, you're a renewal agency, you're not going to be able to edit it. It says that it's marked as complete. That's because you completed it last year. So what you're going to want to do is turn it back into edit mode. And there are instructions to tell you how to do that within the applicant profile instructions. So here's what that looks like. So when you go into the submission summary, it says it's been marked as complete. You can hit edit. This is how it tells you when you've last updated a variety of information. So I go through, I'll just re-upload my nonprofit documentation. It'll show the current date, and I know that I've done a variety of these things. Once you go through all these steps, you'll be able to hit submit again, and then you can move forward with accessing the project application. Something that is very important, if you're a new applicant, you want to make sure that you have a DUNS number and that you have completed or renewed your agency in the system for award management, or SAM. These things can take up to 4 weeks to complete. So hopefully you've already read the NOFA, you're aware of these requirements, or you already have this information. You could also look on page 14 of the NOFA for more information on how to do this. For agencies who are renewals, you need to make sure that your DUNS is active and your SAM is active. You typically will get a reminder once a year to go in and do that. So if you're not the one doing it, make sure that someone on your team has already done it. Code of conduct. All applicants are required to develop and maintain a code of conduct, and it has to be on file with HUD. They should have a link in the detailed instructions or on the screen when you're doing your applicant profile. You can click on it and see if your code of conduct is on file with HUD. If it's not listed, you have to upload it, and if you have any revisions to your code of conduct, you need to upload a new version. So the local competition timeline, this is in our Fill NOFA, but just wanted to provide it again. So applications are due August 22nd to the COC. Now, what that looks like is that you're going to have submitted an application in eSnaps for your project, and you've also done the HUD supplement, or excuse me, the supplemental application. That supplemental application provides our local rating and ranking members additional information about your project so that it can be scored on the local level. On September 5th, rating and ranking will occur. There won't be any in-person interviews. The rating and ranking team will only call if they have questions. All the details on how to submit your application can be found in the Phil NOFA. We will be new this year. We'll be distributing a preliminary priority list immediately after rating and ranking. So folks will know exactly where they're recommended to be placed, whether it be in tier 1 or tier 2, and exactly what project number they fall into. If you decide to file an appeal, that must be done by September 9th. And then the actual appeal would be due by the 11th. The board will approve, or the Alliance Board will approve the priority list on the 12th, and then the official final notification of funding recommendations will be released on the 13th. Now, the week of the 13th through the 20th, what will happen is that feedback from rating and ranking will go back to applicants, so that they will need to change this within their application or that, or maybe it will be the amount of money they're applying for. And so they will have those 7 days to make those adjustments, and then they'll need to resubmit their application through eSnaps. Then the Alliance will work on the finishing touches to the collaborative application, and it will be submitted to HUD by the deadline of September 30th. All of the details on these timelines can be found in the Phil NOFA. So how you submit a project application to the Alliance is that you're going to have one PDF per project with a table of contents and each item separated by a title page. So again, you'll have a copy of your eSnaps application, your HUD COC program supplemental application. That's our local little supplement application. New this year, also, we're requiring your project policies and procedures. We have seen a lot of agencies don't have policies and procedures that meet the minimum HUD standards, so we want to take this time to take a look at those. Agencies will also be scored on those. And while match letters are not required at the HUD level, they are required locally. So we want you to include your match letters for the project, or a notification or letter from your agency indicating when you expect to receive match documentation. We also want, for renewal projects, an APR with a date range of July 1st, 2018 to June 30th, 2019. New projects or projects with less than 12 months of data, HMIS or CES projects should not submit an APR. So this is merely for renewal projects. If you have any issues with running an APR, please reach out to the HMIS help desk. And finally, we would like a LOCKSS report showing the draws for your most recent operating year or operating year to date if the program is in its first year. Then agencies need to submit one PDF per agency with a table of contents and each item separated by a title page. So let's say an agency is submitting 3 project applications. They would have 3 separate PDFs for their projects and 1 PDF for their agency. And for the agency, it'll include their most recent audit, or if they're under that threshold, it's going to be their most recent 990 tax return, current agency budget, articles of incorporation and bylaws, if it's not on file with the Alliance, and a 501c3 letter if it's not on file with the Alliance. So what that means is all renewal projects already have that information on file, so they don't need to submit it. An organization chart, board of directors roster, the indirect cost rate agreement if applicable, a HUD monitoring letter and all correspondence with HUD if applicable, executed Alliance partnership agreement, and then the applicant profile as submitted through eSnaps. So a couple things here. If you don't have an indirect cost rate, if you don't have HUD monitoring letter, just put non-applicable on the cover page for that section. So we know you didn't forget it, but that it's not applicable. Again, articles of incorporation, 501c3, just put on file with the Alliance, but do add the cover sheet in. And then also note that there is scoring for accuracy of the project applications and agency submissions. So making sure that it's only one PDF, that every item is submitted by a title, is separated by a title page, so on and so forth. So there will be points associated with that this year. So if you only have one renewal project, a total of 2 PDFs would be sent. Those are going to be sent via email, and that email address is in the NOFA by the submittal deadline. You will receive an email receipt for your submission, and if you don't receive it within 2 business days, you must follow up to ensure you receive a submission receipt. Also, be sure to include a contact name and number for whoever will be knowledgeable of your project and available on the day of rating and ranking should the reviewers have questions. So the actual rating and ranking process will be on Tuesday, that should be September 5th, my apologies. That will be on September 5th. And then it will be phone calls only, no appointments. Again, we talked about the contact information. And then as in past years, there will be a $250 application fee for each project submitted, and that the agency must be an Alliance member in good standing. So at this point, we'll entertain any questions that folks have. I'm going to take you all off mute. And then, of course, anything submitted via the chat, we will respond to you at the end of the webinar. So I'm taking you all off mute right now. Do we have any questions?
Will we receive and this is Jody, will we receive an invoice for the $250 application fee? I don't remember that from last year.
Yes, you will receive one. Some agencies submit the check with their application and some wait for an invoice. So if you don't submit it with your application, we'll send you an invoice. And I think you're all paid and good from last year. So that's probably why you don't remember, is that it was pretty painless. Your agency probably got an invoice and you didn't even get bothered with it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are those for renewals as well as new applications?
The $250 fee?
Yes.
Yes, for all project applications. What that does is it covers, we hire a consulting firm called Home Base, and that is to augment the cost of that. So what they do is they review our collaborative application, make sure that we're meeting all the requirements and that our application is written and presented as successfully as possible to HUD. So that augments those costs. Any other questions?
Michelle?
Yes.
Do we still need a certification of consistency like we have in the past years?
So actually that happens on the collaborative applicant application. That sounds really weird. And not the project level. So no applicants need that, only the COC. So you're off the hook on that. Any other questions?
Yeah, when the application says work incentive, what are some of those types of work incentives when they mean by that? Are we supposed to help, like buy work materials or work clothes, or are we supposed to reduce rent if they get work? I don't know. What does that mean?
Well, so you'll want to review the HUD COC interim rule for all eligible expenses and activities, and also read the HUD COC NOFA for 2019. But primarily, if you're looking at what the priorities are for HUD. They want you to connect people to other services. So HUD wants to provide housing. They don't want to provide the support services. So you want to look at your partner agencies. So in Kings County, that would be like the Jobs Training Office. It might be other programs that provide work opportunities for clients. The other thing is you may have opportunities within your agency. So for example, maybe instead of hiring a janitorial firm that you're using participants in your program. That would be a way to leverage sort of your already existing expenses while enhancing the lives and self-sufficiency of the clients that you're serving.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Come on, you guys are too easy on me. Any others? Okay, well, I think we're going to call it a wrap. We do have our own little FAQ portal that you can submit questions on. And so what we'll try and do is respond to those. That's going to be for the local process only. And then we'll keep a link with up-to-date local FAQs. If you have questions about the HUD competition, you're going to want to either submit those through the the AAQ, or review the FAQs. If you still can't figure it out, please feel free to reach out to us. We are here to support you, but know that if you can't get into eSnaps or you can't access a project application, we don't have access to your login or your projects in eSnap. So that's something you'll have to navigate with HUD. But before you do that, read those detailed instructions and navigational guides. I can assure you that minus a very odd glitch, everything can be addressed in those guides. I have pored over them year over year and tried to figure out how to get from point A to point B, and sure enough, the way to overcome that hurdle is in those guides. And you know, the other thing is to remember, oftentimes you have a browser issue. Like if you can't, it's not saving something, or you've saved something and you don't see it, kind of remember, what browser am I using? And get out of Google Chrome, get out of Firefox, and hop on over to Edge, just at least for your work in eSnaps. Okay, so thank you all for participating. We will release this recording. It will be on the website, so you can listen to it there, but I'm also going to release the slides, so you could just take a look at those too. So we wish you all the best of luck in the competition, and we certainly hope that we have some new applicants and new projects coming through for these bonus funds, and even through reallocation. Thank you so much.